I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyourear for details.
This is Word Down Your Way, in which those about to tour salute you.
Welcome to this, and someone I would like to publicly thank for the kudos that I acquired at school by simply owning a copy of Stand Up by Jethro Tull, which I still have and treasure, and they're touring again in 2026. Ian Anderson, lovely to see you. Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Nice to be with you. And I got a little bit of kudos for writing and recording that album when Joe Cocker stepped into the coffee shop breakfast room at Lowe's Midtown Manhattan Hotel and wandered over to look at my plate of 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, and crispy bacon, and said, "Oh, congratulations! You're number one in the British album charts." And I said, "Oh, wow, that's great. Thanks very much, Joe." And he said, "I don't suppose you're going to eat all of that bacon, are you?" As he helped himself to a rasher. And it's the only time I ever spoke to Joe Cocker. But I thought it was interesting that in order to cadge a slice of bacon, he would come and tell me we were number one in the charts. But I found out later that day, indeed, we were. So he got the news first.
I'm sure he was hugely envious as well. But that's brilliant. Look, so we're going to go back to... we'll talk about the new tour in a moment, but we're going to go back to through the wavy lines of time to the first gigs that you ever saw. Can you remember the first live performance you ever saw of any kind? Actually, I mean, it could be a panto or whatever.
Cliff Richard and the Shadows.
Oh, right.
At the then ABC Theatre in Blackpool.
Yeah.
When I think my Aunt Molly took me to see Cliff. So I had a thing about Cliff because Cliff was our Elvis. I mean, he wasn't Elvis, and he was with the slightly sort of sneering Elvis lip and the wobbly legs and things. He seemed, even to me as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old, whatever I was, he seemed to me a bit of an Elvis imitator. But he was our Elvis. He was our Cliff. And so I've always had a soft spot for Cliff because he began by doing, more or less rock and roll. I mean, he wasn't the crooner that he became. He was, he seemed to have a little edge about him, even though it was an acquired edge. So I was quite keen to see them. But I actually ended up being more impressed by the Shadows, and in particular by Hank Marvin, whose easy, accurate, very, very precise but evocative guitar playing was something, I suppose, that awoke in me the possibility that maybe I could play like that. And I remember having a battered old Spanish guitar at that time and learning to play the solo in Guitar Tango by the Shadows, which had a sort of lovely last line that kind of went across the bar lines. It certainly wasn't the blues. No. And it certainly wasn't rock and roll. It was something, I suppose, you would call progressive pop, Guitar Tango of its day.
It's really interesting you should say that, because so many of the Shadows records were not rock and roll, were they? They were exotic. They were calling up distant places and strange atmospheres and so forth, weren't they?
Yeah, and obviously
Hawaii and stuff.
Hank had a hankering, as you would, for exotic places, because he then took himself off to Australia, I think, in later life, but he impressed me, and I'm sure all of my age group, that this was the class act to follow as a guitar player, because he played nicely in the same way as Peter Green played nicely. and even Eric Clapton, in a way, often played nicely. I like guitar players who can control their instrument, who don't just use flash fingering in order to impress you and cram as many notes in as possible. So, guitar players who play nicely. Ritchie Blackmore, another one who plays nicely. Not that he can't play flash and fast, but he chooses the moments, and the rest of the time, it's evocative. It sings to you, and that's what the Shadows did. They sang as an instrumental group. They sang melodies to me.
So, growing up in Blackpool, you must have had the opportunity to see loads of acts.
But I also saw Adam Faith, who, and although he was essentially just a pop act with only really a couple of hits, as I recall, Adam Faith, he did have a bad boy look about him. Tell, they called him.
Yes.
I quite liked Adam Faith, and he had that slightly, he was what was he? Was a rather remote kind of a character early on. He obviously didn't like being interviewed. Wasn't a naturally sounding gregarious or upfront person. He seemed like he had a little edge to him. He was the Kimi Räikkönen of early British pop. Seemed slightly remote and aloof, but only because I think he wasn't very good at communicating. But of course, later on, he became an actor and really quite a communicator in his later life, even as a self-appointed business guru.
Yes,
so yeah, Adam
financial
Faith was a good
expert.
guy.
Yes, money-saving expert.
When was your first time on stage performing music?
It was at the Holy Family Youth Club in North Blackpool. Probably, I guess, about 1965. Jeffrey Hammond, John Evans, and I, a three-piece band, got up and played to some very disinterested young Catholic schoolgirls on a youth club night who basically we got up and played. They all went off into as soon as we started, they went off into the next room. We played to an empty room. And,
what were you playing that was so instantly attractive? Can you remember any of the set list?
Well, that might have been the problem. What we were playing was our own covers of blues songs.
Self-penned classics.
Well, they weren't self-penned, but they were self-arranged, and
Self-arranged.
it wasn't top 10 material, so it didn't interest 14-year-old schoolgirls. And frankly, they didn't really interest us because they did seem just a little bit too young and a little bit too. I mean, because we were 16 or 17 or whatever, and they did seem rather. Like children in a way. And so I remember thinking, this is not going to be our audience. Even 2 or 3 years from now, they probably still won't like the kind of music that we would want to play.
I'm envisaging a world of men in long greatcoats. This is what
well, yes. I mean, I'm not one of those who ever set out to appeal to the to girls in the sense of trying to look sexy and attractive on stage. I always thought, let's play it the other way, and then the really interested ones might come to me without me having to go looking, as it were. But no, I didn't ever really like the kind of preening that many acts seemed to do. Even then, they preened on stage, and it was obviously a sexual come on, and I just. It seemed a little bit too obvious to do that, so I went the other way. Always tended to dress down, even in a way with the cod and tight peats. I wasn't setting out to appeal to people in that way. It was almost an act of rebellion against what was quite often, well, the bands we were playing with in the USA, for example. Were jeans and check shirt crowds. They never dressed up to go on stage, bless them. But bands like Leslie West's Mountain or What's that band that did something about a riverboat?
Creedence
This wheel
Clearwater.
keeps on turning.
Creedence too.
Creedence Clearwater, yeah. I mean, they were all good old
Check
boys.
shirts.
You know, they never dressed up, whereas we Brits, some of us, did tend to try to do what wasn't being done in America at the time, which was to be, apart from Captain Beefheart's band, you know, the Magic Band were all, or not all of them, but some of them did tend to use a little bit of costumery on stage. They were an interesting band who.
Where did that idea of the kind of British aristocracy kind of come from? I love that because Jeffrey Hammond, his name was changed to Jeffrey Hammond-Hammond, and Barry Barlow was Barrymore Barlow, and suddenly it was deerstalkers and tweeds, and I love that idea, the kind of landed gentry. Where did that come from?
Well, in the case of Jeffrey Hammond-Hammond, it was because his father was called Hammond, and his mother's maiden name was also Hammond.
Oh,
But you know, I never knew that.
So somebody, and I don't know whether it was Jeffrey or John or perhaps I suggested, well, let's hyphenate you, just to make you stand out from the crowd. So Jeffrey, whether willingly or unwillingly, became hyphenated, and Barry, for some reason, I don't know, Barrymore. Were there any other Barrymores in the world of arts and entertainment? I'm not sure that I remember any, but whatever. It just seemed like a slight exaggeration. But again, it was perhaps in a way following the extremes of Captain Beefheart's names that he gave his band, because you know Mark Boston, the bass player, was became
Rocket Morgan? No.
Yes, Rocket Morgan, that's right.
Yes.
And Zoothorn Rollo, the guitar player.
Yeah.
You know, that these were, and Winged Eel Fingerling. I mean, they were. I mean, again, I think the band didn't have any say in any of this.
No,
they were just pronounced from here on it. You will be known as.
Yeah.
A bit like Engelbert suddenly being, you know, told that. Whatever his name was, something Dorsey.
Jerry Dorsey.
Jerry Dorsey. Now listen, Jerry, said the manager.
Yes.
I think we're going to call you Engelbert Humperdinck.
Well, it seemed to work, didn't it, for him?
Well, it certainly did, because he got me to play on his new album a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God, amazing.
Well, when I say his producers asked me would I play, and they let me choose the track. It's an album, I guess, going to be released, I would hope, in time for his tour, because he's on, I guess, his final tour. He'll be 90 years old when he plays in the UK later this year. And so he's doing an album of rock covers, basically 1970s music. And I was allowed to pick one of the tracks to play on, and I chose, being a little bit aware of Engelbert's somewhat checkered love life past, I suggested I would like to play on Feel Like Makin Love.
The Bad Company.
Bad Company track, yeah. So, and actually Engelbert does it very, he's not trying to sing it in a out and out raucous, I mean, he like me is more of a baritone, but he sings in the later choruses. It's quite a tough sounding voice, and it is quite convincing. I mean, being asked to do something like that may seem so absolutely ridiculous. It's not going to help my CV in a later life or in the next one to come back. So what do you do? Why are you auditioning to be in the whatever? Well, I did play with Engelbert Humperdinck once. It's not going to actually win me any brownie points with anybody.
On a record that was on a track that was used for a Viagra TV advert. Yes.
Oh, was it?
No, I'm just guessing it might be.
Because that would have been perfect.
Yeah, that's I think it's its destiny. But just go back to Jethro Tull. Can you remember the first Jethro Tull gigs? Can you remember the reaction at those and where they were?
Well, we slipped into that really at the Marquee Club and some of the other blues clubs and back of pub rooms that we played in at the end of '67, beginning of '68, when that transition between the four-piece band that would become Jethro Tull a few weeks later morphed into Jethro Tull as we knew it, with the name towards the end of January 1968. And it was a slow start because we were playing to, literally, I remember one gig we played to, there were 4 people and a dog. One of them brought his dog. And even the dog left halfway through. It wasn't an immediate hit. But relatively speaking, just a few weeks later, we were beginning to build a following. And in those early days at the Marquee Club, when we got a so-called residency, we played every second Thursday, I think, at the Marquee Club. We were building a following, and it started off with, maybe 50 people in the audience, and then the next time it was 150, and the next time it was 400, and then I remember one of the last Marquee Club shows that we did, I arrived, and they were queuing all the way around the block, not in Wardour Street, but all the way up the side street and round the back. It was, and I remember because I walked down the length of the queue just to make sure they were really all going to the gig, and indeed they were. It was. At that moment, you felt that you had arrived, and even better, so had the audience.
Yes.
So your tour in next year is your kind of logo for the tour has got 1968 to 2026. So is that the idea of the full story of the band in that?
Well,
tour?
In a way, since the second album came out in 1969, it has been, to a degree, a best of function of performance, that you are playing something, from your earliest efforts through to whatever you're doing now. And it's just that with many albums under the belt in those years, then it does still generally be, it still will generally be a broad look at the big picture in terms of including. We actually play it currently, I think, when I'm playing next, I can't remember, next Saturday, I think. Not tomorrow, week Saturday, we're in Germany for the start of quite a few concerts that take us through to the end of this year. But it's, there are 3 tracks from the first album. And then bits and bobs all the way through, including, 4 songs that cover the last 3 albums since 2022.
So you're also, before this tour, you're playing some Christmas shows.
As usual, yeah.
Tell us about this.
In 2012, I think it was, I was asked to play. I'd done a couple of church gigs in Europe prior to that over the years, but they were things that had something to do with television, some seasonal thing with other artists on the bill. But I was asked in 2012. In fact, it was Greg Lake, I think, the year before, who asked me to, and it wasn't 2012, it was 2004. I think Greg Lake had asked me the year before to go and play with him at the St. Bride's Church in Fleet Street,
yes.
Church of the Journalists, which I'm sure you will know well.
We know it well.
And so we got up and we did I Believe in Father Christmas, and then the church said, "Would you come back and play for us, a Christmas concert, as a fundraiser?" So I said, "Okay." I did that a couple of times, and then we started getting other ideas to play in other places and occasional requests. And indeed, Greg Lake came and returned the favor in 2012, I think it was, at Salisbury Cathedral, not long before he passed away. And we did I Believe in Father Christmas. And in fact, I still include, in honor of Greg Lake, I still include that song as part of the set list that we play in our Christmas shows as fundraisers for cathedrals and churches. And something I like to do because I visit churches and cathedrals, grand places of magnificent architecture and historical significance, primarily because I'm in support of the building and the function of of religion rather than calling myself a Christian or doing it out of a devout sense of service. In the name of our Lord, I do it because I'm primarily concerned about literally keeping the roof on these places, because they will never be built again or rebuilt again. And those that fall into bankruptcy, as a couple of them have. I mean, I'm playing in Peterborough Cathedral again this year, because the last time I played Peterborough Cathedral, it was technically bankrupt. They hadn't paid any of their staff for 3 months, and it was all looking like it would close down. They did struggle through that crisis, hopefully with a little bit of help from me and other people who coughed up something to keep them going. But they are once again back in the doldrums financially, as several cathedrals are.
Well, so one thing you say about your tour next year is that you like to travel by train where possible.
Yes, I am Michael Portillo with a flute. Let's be frank here. It's I enjoy train journeys for the sake of it, as well as the historical part of it, and even from the very earliest days of Jethro Tull, I would travel on the train, maybe to go and visit my parents in Blackpool, and I even have a song. I have several songs about trains, in fact, but one of the first ones was Cheap Day Return.
Oh yes,
because that was what I did.
So does the whole band travel by train?
Sometimes. In fact, I booked them all on a train for a couple of journeys this year, but I travel on a train a few times, and on a UK tour, I can do it mostly by train, although sometimes I do return home after a show if it's not too far away and somebody picks me up to bring me home, sleep in my own bed. But, I should think...
But you still enjoy doing it? You still enjoy touring?
I enjoy the actual touring, the travel part of it, much more than I used to. Or put it this way, I hate it much less than I used to, because in early days, travel was really, even before 9/11, in the days when you showed up at an airport half an hour before a flight and thought nothing of it. These days, it's more like 2.5 hours before a flight, but you learn to cope with try and use the time. It's office hours, at least it is in the BA lounge, and so I try and do useful things in that period of time, and try to take the stress out of travel as much as possible, not just for me, but for the band and crew too. So we do try to make it easy. The internet began to be really active, I suppose, around 1998, maybe. One of the first things I did when I got a computer and learned how to navigate the World Wide Web was to dispense with the services of travel agents, who I found, by the time you've explained to them the logistics of tour travel and where you want to stay, how you want to get there, by the time you've explained the rationale behind it, so they don't book you on ridiculous flights at the wrong time of day or put you in hotels miles away from where you've got to do the show. By the time you've been through it all and corrected all the mistakes they've made, suddenly you could do that online yourself, and just the research that you do to check out the availability of flights and prices and times, you might as well just press the go button and pay for it than get somebody else to try and replicate that part of it and then charge you increasingly an arm and a leg for the privilege of doing it. So travel agents had to go, and then our agent, when he retired after some 37 years or something, he was our agent, dear old Kenny Bell. He tried to push us towards another agent who was a pal, but I offered the job to my son, who had done pretty much everything else at that point in terms of, he'd been a drum roadie, he'd been a stage manager, he'd been a front of house lighting engineer, and he'd done every job including playing the drums with me on all the orchestral tours and performing on some albums too. So he really knew the big picture, and so I said, "Why don't you be the agent?" And he was a little hesitant because he had no experience of that. And I said, well, to some extent, they will come to you, but I can obviously give you all the contacts of all the promoters and companies that we've dealt with historically, and those are the people to go out and work with. And so if I have to pay somebody 10%, I might as well keep it in the family.
That makes sense. So what are the songs that you always play that people would be mortified if you didn't play?
Well, I'm not sure what they would be mortified. There might be a cause for instant celebration and flag waving. Oh, they didn't play that one tonight, thank goodness. Well, the ones that we play, I think that are so, well, for me personally, they're so much a part of the Jethro Tull story, and in some way, perhaps they have something a little unique about them that makes them, for me, very important as a way of anchoring everything else at a particular point along the way. The songs like, obviously, Aqualung, Locomotive Breath, those are two, and Bouret from the stand-up album, they're pretty much always in the show. Everything else is a movable feast, but there are a number of songs, 10, 20 songs that are regularly in the show, but periodically they get left off the dinner table, and only to take their place again a year or two later. So but yeah, yes, there are just a few. There's, I probably would try to keep it to those three that are always in the show.
Right.
Nothing else is always in the show.
Well, that's the Curiosity Tour. It's called. Starts I think in Perth in April next year, and finishes in Eastbourne in the middle of May 2026. But before that, before Christmas, you've got, as you say, your annual charity Christmas shows at various cathedrals: Bath Abbey, Peterborough Cathedral, Southwark Cathedral. Ian Anderson, thanks very much for talking to us.